Welcome to our deep dive into Britney Spears, like you've never heard it before.
Really going deep.
We're going deep into her autobiography, The Woman in Me. This is Britney, in her own words.
No filter.
No filter.
This is not the tabloids, this is her.
Exactly. And it's a side of her story, I think, a lot of people are going to be surprised by, because we're getting beyond the headlines here, beyond the music videos. We're talking about a real person.
This is a human story.
It is. And it starts in Kentwood, Louisiana.
Small town.
Small town. We've, that classic Southern charm, and she writes about that, tight-knit community church on Sundays.
But there's always more to the story.
Always more to the story. And she reveals a little bit of that kind of undercurrent, almost like a Southern Gothic element, especially when you get into her family history.
It's like those small towns, they can hold secrets. You know what I mean? Like that sense of community can sometimes, maybe map some of the more difficult things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because she talks about those anxieties, even at a young age, and music being her escape.
And that's something that continues throughout her life.
Absolutely.
This need for escape, to have control when the world seems like it's got you spinning.
It's that safe space.
Yes.
And for her, it was music from a very young age.
It wasn't just a hobby.
No.
It was a lifeline.
And you see that ambition early on, too. Home videos. She's directing at 8 years old.
8 years old. Think about that.
Winning dance competitions at 5. I mean, come on.
There's natural talent, for sure.
That way.
But then there's this drive, this understanding of performance. She's not just dancing. She's creating a vision, even then.
But then there's this tragic event that really casts a shadow over her childhood. The suicide of her paternal grandmother, Jean.
Heartbreaking.
And she even talks about how much they looked alike. Which is, just adds another layer of sadness to it,
And this is where we start to see the ripple effect of trauma, right? Intergenerational trauma. Because her grandfather, June, was abusive. And that abuse, it impacted the whole family. I mean, it's like this dark cloud that hangs over everything. It's this cycle of pain.
Exactly.
That's hard to break. And she talks about how June, was abusive to other women in his life, too. So it really paints this disturbing picture.
It's a pattern. And it deeply impacted her father's own struggles.
Yeah, and his ability to connect with his children in a healthy way, in a stable way. And then you add on top of that this really stark contrast between her parents' backgrounds, her dad, with this really tumultuous upbringing, her mom, more comfortable life, Catholic school, hanging out with what she called the, quote, cool kids. Totally different worlds.
Absolutely. And you can't underestimate the impact of that socioeconomic divide.
Right.
It's not just about different upbringings, it's different values, different expectations that they brought into their marriage.
And then when you layer on top of that her dad's alcoholism, business failures, it's a lot. It's a lot for a young girl to be around.
A lot of instability. And she even says, there's a part in the book where she's like, I preferred it when my dad wasn't around because it was quiet.
Wow.
Yeah. It's really sad.
Speaks volumes.
It does.
It speaks to that need for stability, for peace, which she found in music.
Yes.
That was her escape.
It's interesting. She talks about working at her great-grandmother's seafood restaurant when she was little. So you've got 9-year-old Britney cleaning shellfish 1 minute, like doing these dance routines for customers the next.
It's the perfect microcosm of her life, really.
Yeah.
That blend of ordinary and then this burning need to perform.
Yeah, yeah.
She had this work ethic, but it's more than that. It's like she could find an outlet for this incredible talent, even in the most unexpected places. And let's not forget the women in her life, like her great-grandmother, trying to provide some stability.
Although even that was disrupted. Her mom suffers a postpartum hemorrhage after Jamie Lynn's born.
Oh.
Britney witnessed it, which I can't imagine.
Trauma on top of trauma. And think about it. For a child to witness something like that, especially at that age, it's incredibly unsettling, It just reinforces this feeling of unpredictability.
Like you can't rely on anything to be stable and okay.
Exactly. And for someone like Britney, who craved control, that lack of control, it's unsettling.
And you see this push and pull throughout her early life.
Mm-hmm.
The longing for a normal life, but also this incredible drive to perform. So she's driving at 13, drinking toddies with her mom.
Wait, toddies?
Toddies.
Okay, continue.
Gets caught smoking with a friend, but all the while, her mom is sending out demo tapes.
There's the drive.
It's like this weird juxtaposition of like typical teenage rebellion.
Right.
But on the cusp of this massive career.
It's that tension between the ordinary and the extraordinary that defines so much of her life.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because her mom sends one of those tapes to this lawyer that they had met, Larry Rudolph.
Okay.
And he's the one who's like, you need to record a professional demo. And that's the demo that catches the ear of Clive Calder.
Wow.
Clive Calder, big-time record executive.
Sliding doors moment right there.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about a sliding doors moment.
From small-town aspirations to a real shot in the big leagues.
And she even talks about walking into his office, this massive office, and seeing this tiny dog she'd never even seen before. And it's like she stepped into another universe.
And little did she know.
Right.
Her whole universe was about to change.
So from small-town Louisiana, she's suddenly thrust into this whole other world of recording studios and music execs. And it's intense. And she meets this guy, Max Martin.
Okay, Max Martin.
Yeah, who becomes a huge part of her story, personally and professionally. And it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, right?
Young Britney Spears, straight out of Kentwood, working with the guy who, shaped the sound of pop music.
It's amazing.
For a whole generation.
It is. And she even tells this funny story about accidentally setting a table on fire with a candle when they were having dinner. I don't know, it just made me laugh.
She's just a kid, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Navigating this crazy experience. And to your point earlier, it wasn't all glam, right?
Right.
She's talking about months in a New Jersey recording studio, just
finding her voice, literally.
Literally.
But she also talks about how she had ideas about the sound, right?
Oh, absolutely.
She was very much in control. Like, she pushed back on some of the initial production, wanted it to be, I don't know, more authentically her.
Which is amazing to have that kind of self-awareness.
At that age, yeah.
So young.
Yeah.
To be working with someone like Max Martin and say, actually, I hear it a little differently.
I want it to sound like this.
Yeah, exactly. This is me. I think she even says she wanted it to be more like R&B.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then boom, Baby One More Time.
Iconic.
Changes everything. And get this, she actually had the concept for that music video.
No way.
Yeah, like the schoolgirl thing, that was her.
Wow.
They had pitched her this whole astronaut thing, which I can't even imagine. It's wild, right?
It speaks to her understanding of herself, you know?
Totally.
Her image, even then, she got it.
Yeah, this was not just a manufactured pop star.
No.
She had a vision.
100%. And as she's dealing with all of this, she's also meeting these artists that she grew up idolizing, like Paula Cole, I think she talks about.
Yeah.
Meeting her and just being completely floored.
And Paula Cole represents, this woman in music who challenged norms.
Absolutely, not afraid to be herself.
Yeah.
And I think meeting someone like that, for Britney, it probably had a big impact.
For sure. But then as her career is skyrocketing, her personal life takes center stage, and enter Justin Timberlake.
Oh boy.
And she really describes, falling for him hard, that magnetic connection.
It was a whole thing.
It was a whole thing.
Early 2000s, everybody's obsessed.
But it's not all denim outfits and red carpets.
No, it wasn't a fairy tale.
Not at all. She hints at Justin's infidelity. And even though she stayed quiet publicly at the time, years later, it clearly still affects her.
You carry that with you.
She talks about being at a Lakers game with her sister and getting booed.
Oh, God.
Can you imagine?
Public scrutiny, it's just
brutal.
It's brutal.
And this whole thing really highlights the double standard women face.
100%. She's, 19, 20 years old?
Mm-hmm.
And she's being judged, shamed for a situation where she's the one who was hurt.
And let's not forget, this is all happening at the same time that her team is pushing this whole virgin image.
Right, which is so messed up.
And she talks about how she'd been sexually active since she was 14. She was living with Justin, but yet she's supposed to be America's sweetheart.
It's an impossible standard.
It's crazy. And I can't even imagine the pressure.
And then we wonder why young stars break down.
She starts to look for solace in religion. She talks about starting Prozac around this time.
Just trying to cope, It's a lot to deal with.
It makes my heart break for her, honestly. But she powers through. She performs with Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Films those Pepsi commercials, stars in Crossroads.
It's easy to forget, amidst everything else, how incredibly successful she was.
She was unstoppable. But she was still struggling. And she talks about how, even during filming Crossroads, she struggled with method acting.
Interesting.
Yeah, she really got into that character's head to the point where it messed with her own head.
You can see how that would be a slippery slope.
Totally.
Oh.
And it's in the middle of all this, she meets Kevin Federline.
Okay.
And she talks about him as this source of comfort, escape.
She wanted normal.
She wanted normal. She wanted stability.
Of course.
She wanted a family.
And who can blame her? She'd been denied that for so long.
She has this line that I love where she talks about him holding her for hours in a pool. Not in like, a sexual way, just holding her. And it made her feel safe.
Someone just hold her,
Yeah. And they get married. She has Sean Preston. And they even start filming their reality show, Britney and Kevin. Chaotic.
Oh, okay.
So she's trying to control the narrative.
Take back some of that control.
Exactly.
But as we know, that's not always how life works, is it?
It's like this image of, the perfect life, marriage, kids, reality show. But we know things aren't always as they seem.
Definitely not. And this whole idea of normal for Britney was always going to be complicated, right? Like, you can't just escape the spotlight, the pressure, all those years of it by, like, getting married and having kids.
Especially when you're Britney Spears.
Exactly.
And that's when things kind of start to unravel, right?
Yeah.
She talks about the Onyx Hotel tour and how, I don't know, she felt it was too sexualized and she was really uncomfortable with it. There's even a part where she's like, I was literally praying for an injury just to get off this tour.
It's heartbreaking. Because on one hand, she's being marketed as this sex symbol, but on the other, she's clearly not comfortable with it.
And it seems like nobody's listening.
And again, you see that need for control. It's like she's trapped in this cycle, right?
Exactly.
Being told who she is, what to do. And it's during this tour that she hurts her knee.
Which is what she'd been praying for, ironically.
Right. And it leads to the painkillers.
And then, of course, she has Jaden, her second son, and then the postpartum depression hits.
It's like everything just snowballs.
It's a lot. And then comes the head shaving incident, which, it's easy to look back and judge, but when you read her account of it, it just feels like this desperate cry for help.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine that level of scrutiny, that pressure, and feeling like you have zero control over your own life.
I can't imagine.
Shaving her head, it was extreme, but it was a way to take back some control.
Like, I'm still here.
Yeah, this is my body.
It's so sad. And sadly, that's just the beginning. She loses custody of her kids, which she calls her biggest heartbreak.
Oh, God.
And then comes the conservatorship.
13 years.
13 years of her life where she has no autonomy.
It's chilling because they frame it as this thing to protect her, but when you really look at it, it was so restrictive.
It was like she was a child again.
Basically.
She couldn't even, make a phone call without permission.
It's hard to even fathom that level of control.
It's wild, and yet even during that time, she's creating Blackout, one of her most critically acclaimed albums.
Recorded while she's living under this oppressive conservatorship.
Just unbelievable.
It speaks to her resilience.
It really does.
Her artistry. She took all that pain, that frustration, and poured it into her music.
And then, thankfully, we see the hashtag Free Britney movement emerge.
Talk about the power of fans, right?
That's amazing.
They knew something was wrong. They could see that she was being silenced, and they refused to be quiet.
And they really helped amplify her voice when she couldn't speak for herself.
Absolutely. That movement played a huge role in her regaining her freedom.
And you mentioned earlier how Britney found solace in comedy.
Oh, yeah.
She talks about Amy Schumer, Kevin Hart, how their work, just gave her some lightness during that time.
It's that idea that even in dark times, you can find moments of joy.
And for her, it was laughter.
And self-help, too.
Oh, yeah. She talks about, really diving into self-help books.
She was searching for answers, for ways to cope.
And then, of course, there's Sam Asghari, who comes into her life, and it feels like a real turning point.
He was her rock. He believed her, stood by her, fought for her.
And then that moment, that incredible moment when she finally gets to speak her truth in court.
Powerful. After years of being silenced, she finally had a voice. It was a turning point in the whole fight.
And thankfully, the conservatorship ends.
Freedom.
She's free.
It's emotional reading about that moment. It's like you go through this whole journey with her, all the ups and downs, and to see her finally break free, it's
amazing.
It's amazing.
And now we see her, making music again on her own terms.
Living her life.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
I think what gets me is, her story, it's about so much more than just her.
Oh, for sure.
It's about control. It's about freedom. It's about, speaking your truth, even when it's hard. And I think that resonates with a lot of people.
Absolutely. But people, especially celebrities.
And it reminds us that everybody deserves to have control over their own lives.
100%.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive.
It has.
Britney Spears, everybody.
In her own words.